Welcome to the Flying Octopus Podcast, offering a new perspective on Red Wings hockey, as well as all the important news from around the NHL. And now, here are your hosts, Tony Wolak, Devin Little, and Evan Sabrin.
Did you guys see this Sasha Barkov story after the Panthers clinched the Stanley Cup on Tuesday? That actually happened in the wee hours of Wednesday morning at 5 a.m., where the neighbor posted its ring video of Barkov calmly ringing the doorbell at 5 a.m. to keep the party going, I should say. What's your thought process if you're sleeping in bed at 5 a.m., someone's just banging on your doorbell to get you out there, and if you don't know who that is at first, like you're gonna be freaked out. But that's probably a pretty cool surprise if if that's actually a Stanley Cup champion and wants you to party. You got to get up out of bed and get dressed and go and be ready to go. So I wonder what would you guys think if that actually happened to you?
I mean, first thing, I'd shoot up out of bed, grab the 5-iron from underneath of it, and then, brace for impact. But, after seeing what's on the ring, like looking at my phone and seeing it's Barkov or whoever it is, celebrating the Stanley Cup, I don't know. I'd probably be in shock for a minute and be like, well, you don't get to do this very often, so might as well, right?
I think I need the context behind it too. Like, how close are these neighbors, right? Because if you're coming over and banging on my door at 5 a.m., I'm probably gonna lose my shit. But again, can you imagine what if Henrik Zetterberg showed up to your house in 2008 after the Red Wings won the Stanley Cup and was just banging on your door, Devin? What do you say?
Oh my gosh, it's Henrik Zetterberg. Nice to meet you. But no, on a real note, yeah, if I don't care if it's 10 at night, midnight, 2 a.m., 5 a.m. If someone's knocking on my door to celebrate a Stanley Cup victory, I guess I'm getting out of bed and celebrating because, like you said, when do you have the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, and God, I hope that guy didn't have to work either, because that's
Yeah.
that's a Wednesday morning.
Oh, you're calling out sick that day. You're definitely
Oh,
calling
for
out.
sure.
Wouldn't it be great if he was like a Bruins fan or something, and he just did that to fuck with him? I don't know. I need the context. I think there's more to that story, because I don't know. You're not waking me up at 5 a.m. It's like, did this guy have kids? Like, how bad was it? So, welcome to episode 40 of the Flying Octopus Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Sabrin, joined by Tony Wolak and Devin Little. Today, we're going to have some fun on the show. If you follow us on Twitter at Flying Octopod, you saw that Devin and Tony yesterday kind of did some hypothetical roster management for the Detroit Red Wings heading into the 2025-26 season. And one of the things that just broke right before we started this podcast was one of Devin's guys, and one of my guys too that I've mentioned in previous shows, Mason Marchment, was just traded from the Dallas Stars to the Seattle Kraken for a third and a fourth round pick. So Devin's going to have to do a little bit of pivoting to update his version of his roster projections. We're also going to get into our draft prospect profile. Roger McQueen, 6'5", 198-pound forward from the Brandon Wheat Kings, is this week's guy for Devin. And Devin, we know you're a huge fan. He does come with some injury concerns, and that's something that Devin's going to go get into a little bit. So we're just excited to discuss him, because we are by the time you see this podcast or listen to this podcast, we are going to be a week away from the NHL draft. And it's going to be out here in Los Angeles, and I'm going to be attending, and I just cannot wait. It's probably one of my favorite things of the entire season, sporting-wise. So we're going to get to a lot of that today. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you where you can find us. Find us on our YouTube channel at The Flying Octopod. Give us a follow on Twitter at Flying Octopod. And you can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Devin, we're going to start with you and your roster projections. And I know you just got blown up, literally in the last 3 minutes. I literally just happened while we started this podcast. So, Devin, I want to pick your brain and go over what you see as the Red Wings making significant moves that could bolster this lineup for the 2025-26 season.
Well, I guess I have to start off the top with what you mentioned there. Mason Marchment going to the Seattle Kraken. I think that's a really solid grab for Seattle. And I think it would have been a really solid addition for the Red Wings as well, especially given the acquisition cost of a third and a fourth round pick. I mean, shoot, in my little mock roster here, um, I had them giving up a second round pick. They didn't even give up that. So that's a tidy piece of business for both the Kraken and the Stars. Of course, the Stars are trying to shed salary and make room for all their guys. They recently re-signed Matt Duchene. But we're not talking about the Stars. We're talking about the Red Wings. Um, Mason Marchment was my guy to provide some sandpaper and abrasiveness in the top six. I do still think that they need to go out and get a guy like that. I think that the guy who fills that spot in Tony's lineup is a very viable option as well. Marchment's just the avenue I went down. I thought that was a good opportunity to take advantage of Dallas's salary concerns, but obviously wasn't meant to be. But to reiterate, I think that spot in the top line next to Larkin and Raymond, of course, a lot of people are going to point to Jason Robertson as a fit there, and I'm not going to disagree, but I think ideally you get somebody that can create space for those guys and play a more physical brand of hockey and make them tougher to play against. I really think that more than anything, that's got to be the thing that the Red Wings do is become tougher to play against. And that was kind of on my mind as I made this roster. Going down the forward lines here, top line was Marchment and Larkin and Raymond. Second line was DeBrincat, Casper, and Kane, bringing back Patrick Kane, of course. And then the middle, or the third line, you've got Andrew Kopp down the middle with Amar Sotoblom on his wing. And then a familiar face I have coming back to the Red Wings on a one-year deal, Mr. Gustav Nyquist, who last played with the Red Wings back in 2019. I'm sure longtime fans are very well familiar with this player. I see him as a potential Jonathan Berggren replacement if they include him in a trade, which I did with this mock roster. I think Nyquist is kind of, I mean, even Berggren, if he hits his ceiling, I think he's basically a Nyquist. So I think you kind of just get the player instead of the player that could become that player. And it's nice to have a friendly face again. I think he would do some good things on that bottom six, and he can obviously move up the lineup if need be, and he's solid defensively. And then the fourth line, I have JT Compher in between Michael Rasmussen and Carter Mazer. I do think Carter Mazer makes the team out of camp. I actually think there's a chance that he's higher in the lineup as we progress through that season, but that's a topic for later. Moving to the defense, this is where I really made some moves. Top pairing defense is Moritz Seider, of course, paired with Keandre Miller, who I made a deal with the New York Rangers to acquire. His name is out there. I think latest reports are that 12 to 15, so basically half the league are in on this guy. The way I looked at this, Keandre Miller brings some physicality, would make the defense tougher to play against, has kind of proven himself as a top four defenseman. Maybe how you feel about him overall as a player may vary, but I think at the very least we can all agree that he's a solid maybe second pairing defenseman that can play with a Moritz Seider, knowing that Seider's a bona fide top pairing guy. And Berggren was actually part of this deal to acquire Keandre Miller. So you get a better, younger, and somebody that can be part of the decor person to play with Seider on that top pairing. I also think that this is a possibility because let's not forget just a year ago the Red Wings and Rangers were very much talking about a Jacob Trouba trade, and I do think that they can kind of revisit some of the things they discussed in those trade discussions to then maybe come to an agreement on a Keandre Miller deal. Moving down the lineup, you've got Simon Edvinsson on the second pairing with the big free agent acquisition in the lineup here, Aaron Ekblad. I've talked in the past about how I think he's a guy the Red Wings should pursue. I think that a top four defense of Keandre Miller, Moritz Seider, Simon Edvinsson, and Aaron Ekblad is leagues better than what the Red Wings have had, honestly, since the rebuild has begun, and probably even before that. I think that's a legitimate defense that should be able to win games. I'm not saying it's the best defense in the league or anything like that, but it's competent at the very least. And I don't know how long it's been since Red Wings have had that. And then your bottom pairing, you've got Albert Johansson, who re-signed, and then Ben Sherratt, your seventh defenseman, is Eric Gustafsson. I didn't do anything with the goalies, running it back with Peter Mrazek, Cam Talbot. There are reports that Detroit is looking into the goalie market. I am very interested to see what that looks like and whether or not they are going to make a move there. I not really sure what they're thinking there, so I didn't feel confident enough making a move in net. but there's very much noise out there that they're looking to do something with their goaltending situation. So, of all the moves here, aside from Marchment, which we already know is wrong, I think maybe there's a goalie included here that wasn't reflected on this roster. But to kind of summarize my thoughts here, I think that this roster makes the Red Wings better. I absolutely do. I think that this is a playoff team. I don't think this is a Stanley Cup contender, but I don't think that that's what they need to be next season. I think this is a team that's harder to play against. I think it's a team that's deeper. I think that the offense is good enough to produce on a nightly basis. And I think the defense is good enough to give their goaltenders a chance on a nightly basis. I think that this doesn't solve all of their issues, but it addresses most of them. And it does it in a way where they aren't kind of handcuffing themselves to any long-term egregious contracts, depending on how you feel about Aaron Ekblad and how his game will age. But yeah, I feel pretty good about this roster. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
I like it. I like how you structure the defense. And just, one clarifying question. Justin Hall and Vladimir Tarasenko, did you buy them out? Did you stash them in the minors? What was the plan there?
Justin Hall was a buyout. That was actually the first thing I did. And then Tarasenko, I traded him hypothetically to the Blues in this mock. But honestly, you could just do a future considerations type thing. I do think that the Red Wings will be able to trade him. I just didn't feel like, calling my shot with where he's going and what they're getting back, if anything, for him.
And just to be clear, the buyout window opens tomorrow and runs through June 30th. Should or could see some action in the next couple days.
I like what you did with, adding more sandpaper to the top of the lineup. I think you're right. Overall, this team is a lot closer to a playoff team than what we saw last season. Nyquist was a nice addition. I have him high on my list for depth scoring. He's one of those players where, you can slot him in the bottom six, but in a pinch, he can, move up to the second line, first line, just for, a few games, like if there's an injury as needed. I like it a lot. Carter Mazer, yep, I do think he gets a spot next season. I'm curious though, do you think, Devin, that Aaron Ekblad will actually leave Florida this offseason? Because my money's on him staying, to be honest.
It's going to be interesting. I think that it's going to come down to what else the Panthers want to do. I think it's very feasible for them to keep him. All indications are that he wants to stay in Florida, but every report I've seen is that he's going to have to take a massive pay cut. And I can't help but wonder if his agent at least kind of advises him to look out for his financial future. And yeah, no, I definitely agree. There's a high chance that Ekblad's not even a possibility here. But if he does hit free agency, there's reports out there that the Red Wings will be interested, and that's kind of what I was leaning on with that.
Now, one other thing I wanted to ask about was the K'Andre Miller trade. So what you had was moving Jonathan Berggren, a 2026 first-round pick, and the Rangers' own 2025 third-round pick that the Red Wings had previously acquired in the Ole Mata trade. I'm a bit more conservative when it comes to first-round picks. Like, tell me, like, do you think the Red Wings can get their bang for their buck if they move a first, even if it's next year, which is going to be a pretty solid draft class for Miller?
I think so. And I think that if the Red Wings are serious about pushing their team forward in a meaningful way this offseason, they're going to have to move a first, whether it's this year's at 13th overall, next year's, or whatever. Good players aren't cheap. And I think that there's enough of a market out there for K'Andre Miller that I think the Rangers are going to get a first from someone. It might as well be the Red Wings. And for my money, too, I'm making this trade with the expectation that they're making the playoffs next year. The Red Wings aren't trading a top 10 pick to get K'Andre Miller. They're trading pick 17, 18, 19, whatever. And I can stomach that way more than if it's a top 10 pick. I get why that isn't necessarily appealing to a lot of people, but with the roster I made here, I'm not planning to finish eighth. I'm not planning to finish 24th in the league. I'm planning to finish within a playoff spot. Maybe there's some protections on that pick. I'd be if the Rangers are willing to let there be like a top 10 protection or something like that on there. Absolutely. Um, and maybe if it comes down to it, it has to be the 13th pick in this year's draft. Fine. I liked the idea of giving the Rangers their pick back and then getting them that first that they probably want for Keandre Miller. I am more comfortable giving up a first round pick if you know you're getting a player that's going to stick around for a few years. It's why I was okay when they traded the first round pick for Alex DeBrincat a couple years ago. And it's why I would be okay with them trading a first for Keandre Miller. They're not getting this player for 2 years. In this mock roster I've created, they trade for him and then sign him to a 5-year deal. So um, I get the apprehension, but it's a price I'm willing to pay to make this team better.
So you guys, we had people vote on this on Twitter yesterday, and I voted. And I voted for Devin's team. And I'm sorry, Tony, but it was the Mason Marchment for me. But now that just got absolutely railroaded and completely screwed up what I was going to say. But to be honest, Devin, if the Red Wings made 2 offseason moves this year and it was just Ekblad and Keandre Miller came and brought them in, I would be fine with this offseason. I think defensively that's what has to be addressed. That there's no questions or qualms about it. Gustav Nyquist coming back, I think that would be a great reunion. I could bring out my Gus Nyquist jersey. That's almost as embarrassing as my Peter Mrazek jersey, and wear that once again. I think Nyquist at he's almost 35, 36 now. Still an effective player. Could be a great secondary scoring, depth scoring on the third line. You can move him around. I wouldn't mind seeing the Goose come back. So, Tony, you had some interesting hypotheticals, additions heading into the 2025-26 season yesterday, and you got some people clapping back at you while others really liked it. So, why don't you explain what you did in your roster predictions?
Sure. So this is how I think things are going to play out this offseason for the Red Wings. This is not me in the armchair GM seat. This is like, here's how I think this will actually go. So first off, buying out Justin Hall, trading Jonathan Berggren and a third to Nashville for Michael Bunting, trading Vladimir Tarasenko to Chicago for future considerations. It's a big city, good environment. He's got a player-friendly coach in Jeff Blashill. I think he'd be amenable to that. As for signing, so re-signing Elmer Soderblom, 1 year, $1.15 million. Re-signing Albert Johansson, 2 years, $1.2 million. Patrick Kane re-signed 1 year, $4.5 million. And then as for external free agents, Vladislav Gavrikov, 7 years, $8.5 million. Anthony Beauvillier, 3 years and $3.5 million. Nick Perbix, 3 years, $3 million. And Mikey Isemont, 1 year, $1 million. So that gives me a roster running down the forward lines first. First line of Larkin centering Bunting and Raymond. Second line would be Casper centering DeBrincat and Kane. Third line is Comfort between Soderblom and Beauvillier. And then finally, Kopp centering Rasmussen and Mazur with Isemont as the scratch. And then on defense, you have Gavrikov and Seider, Edvinsson and Perbix, Sherratt and Johansson, and then Gustafsson as with Talbot and Mrazek and net. So honestly, Devin and I had very similar logic with our different roster approaches, just different players, right? So Bunting brought in to be that sandpaper in the top 6. I know I caught a lot of flack for this, but I still think that he would be a great fit. I know there's some ill will there when he was a member of the Maple Leafs, and it was between him, Raymond, Zegras, and Seider for the Calder Trophy, and
when he was 30 years old.
Seider. I mean, that was the chirp. So 29 now. So Benjamin Button over here is apparently going back in age. Um, like he has that experience playing with like quality players in a top six role and producing, right? So last year was a bit of a down year. That's fine. He played with a bad Pittsburgh team and then went to an even worse Nashville team. And like I understand why the numbers weren't so great. He's in a contract year and it just the last year of 4.5 million. I can definitely see him hitting 50 points, especially with Larkin and Raymond. So I think between his abrasive style, his ability to be the first man in on the forecheck with Larkin and Raymond, and the ability to like get to those dirty areas with those two, I think he's the perfect fit. Um, so I was looking at other options for trades, and this one made the most sense in terms of cost. Um, and we'll see how he can perform in a contract year where he's motivated to earn another long-term deal after that. Patrick Kane, no brainer to bring him back with the chemistry that he has with Alex DeBrincat and the rest of the Red Wings forward group, especially on the power play. No brainer. It's the same deal as last year with a slight bump up for the base salary to 4.5 million. Figure that's the way things are going to go with the cap going up. And then another 2 million in potential bonuses for him. And then while Devin had Nyquist as the depth scoring addition, I brought in Anthony Beauvillier. Got to see him a lot as a member of the Capitals this past season after he was acquired from the Penguins. He is another one of those sneaky players who can easily put up 20 goals in your bottom six. Again, another player who gets to the dirty areas, who gets a lot of high danger chances. He's got a pretty good release for a player who plays further down in the lineup. And then I think his style would complement Soderblom and Comfer and those guys in the bottom six pretty well. Like let him do the shooting while the others are first man in the forecheck. Isamon, he's this essentially this year's Tyler Mott, just a depth addition, another player who plays an abrasive style and brings some physicality to the lineup. Defense, Vladislav Gavrikov on the first pair with Seider. I think I've been high on him for a while now, and I can see the connection there. Wanting to come back to playing under Todd McLellan and Trent Yanni. He is one of the most underrated defensemen out there, and I don't know if you can even say that anymore with how much hype he's been getting for free agency, but the guy is rock solid on defense. He really is. And he played a lot of heavy minutes for the Kings the past few seasons. Kind of goes underappreciated. Yeah, the box score numbers aren't very high unless you're looking at minutes played. But he is the type of guy to round out the top four with a physical shutdown defenseman that would pair well with Seider, pair well with Axel Sandin-Pellikka, with those players and Edvinsson. That is an outstanding top four for the next 5 years at least. And then lastly, Nick Perbix. I also think he's an underrated defenseman. His counting stats and his micro stats, they're not anything especially impressive, but he's the type of player, if you're watching him, he has all the tools of a very good defenseman. And I do think Trent Yanni can bring that out of him. Like he has the size, he has the reach, he can drive play up ice, he makes strong passes and is really great with playing in transition and also boxing out on defense. He hasn't put it all together yet. And he's still young. So there's obviously time for him to do this. And I think under a new coaching staff, I think he'll thrive. And playing alongside Edvinsson, you have two defense pairs that can, go up against elite competition and do pretty well. And plus, you're slotting Ben Sherratt correctly on the third pairing. And, if need be, he can jump up for a little bit if needed and be okay. So what do you think? Let me have it.
Beauvillier, 18 goals in 65 games last year. So yeah, you're looking at a possible 2025 goal scorer there. So I did like that. A little confused about Nick Perbix, but again, beggars can't be chooser. He's an upgrade over what's already there. Would love Gavrikov, but I'm betting there's about 25 plus other teams that would love a Gavrikov at this point. And I know the Kings, from what I've heard out here, that they do want to keep him, but there has been some rumblings about with the coaching changes and him not getting along there. Obviously my opinion now changes because of the Mason Marchment deal. Bunting's interesting to me. Bunting's very interesting to me. You didn't really hear a lot about him last year because he went to two teams that were nowhere close to the playoffs, and so I didn't hear a lot about him. But he brings the physicality and something that the Red Wings are looking for. It seems a little more conservative than what Devin did. But what do you think, Devin?
I would say so. I definitely think that this is like I think first and foremost, Tony, you and I very much kind of approach this with very similar ideas in mind. We just kind of accomplish them ever so slightly different. And I do agree, Evan, it's kind of like the more conservative version of mine. I think that I honestly have no qualms with the offense whatsoever because I straight up think it's the same offense I made, just a few different names that are filling the exact same roles. Like Bunting is Marchment in my roster. Beauvillier is Nyquist in mine. Like it's I got no problems at all. In fact, you even committed to the thing that I wanted to do, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And that is you have Cop on the fourth line and Comfer on the third. I actually prefer that. I like Cop, Rassman, and Mazer as a potential fourth line, but I kept thinking about how Cop played with Kane and DeBrincat this year, and I thought about how you you maybe want to reward that by having him not on the fourth line. But with that being said, I like it better how you have it, believe it or not, Tony. Defense. This is where, again, I think we're trying to do the exact same thing. We just accomplish it a little differently. Gavrikov, it feels like to me that if the Red Wings don't get Gavrikov, then they got to get Ekblad. If they don't get Ekblad, then they got to get Gavrikov. Like it's one of those two that like they need to get. Maybe if just for like morale amongst the fan base, it seems like. I do think that if it is Gavrikov, that top pairing with him and Sider, assuming that's what they would do, that's a really good defensive pairing, and that should help. That should help honestly bring out some of the offense in Sider's game because he's not having to be as committed to shutting things down with a really solid defensive partner there in Gavrikov. And then the thing that really stands out to me is the Perbix pickup, and that's honestly my big question I have for you, Tony. I obviously I was a bit more aggressive. I went out and got Keandre Miller. I signed Aaron Ekblad. And those are two like name brand players that have value for this reason and that reason and blah blah blah. Perbix is definitely a name that's going to be under the radar, but it's still a solid one. I guess what I'll say is this: I like the Perbix addition here. Can you try to help me love it?
Certainly. Let me just jump back to something you said real quick, and then I'll move on to Perbix. But I had Andrew Kopp on the fourth line, and JT Compher on the third line, for a reason. Soderblom, Compher, Beauvillier. I see that as a third scoring line, and then Rasmussen, Kopp, and Mazer. That's more of a heavy matchup line. So that's where that logic was coming from. I agree. Kopp was great last year, and when he was out, he was missed. And I think he can definitely play well as the third line center, hell, as the second line center from time to time. As like you said with Brinkhead and I think it was Tarasenko for a little bit there too.
Yep.
But I see him the way the way things shook out, like in my head, like having a heavy fourth line as a matchup line made the most sense. Now for Perbix, both there's like rationale there for both the player and the why him and also why not anyone else. So the why not anyone else part is, so you have Seider locked up for next 7 years, right? You have Evanson on his entry level contract and we'll get a long-term contract most likely thereafter. Gavrikov, I have signed for 7 years. Now, that is the top three of the top four locked down indefinitely. Perbix is a placeholder. He's a good placeholder, but he's a placeholder. That's where I eventually see Axel Sandin Pellikka, either by the end of this coming season or next season or the season after that, but he'll be in that slot. Second line, right defenseman behind Seider. And I could have gone with someone who had a little bit more of a sexier name, but that would have required a bigger contract, longer term, and knowing that eventually that person would probably get pushed down a little bit to the third pair. Like they'd be a great third pairing defenseman, but also that's from a resource management standpoint, I don't love that. So that's why we have someone here as a stopgap who can definitely hold their own as a second pair defenseman, but also keeping that spot warm for Sandy and Pellikka. Now for Perbix, like he got overshadowed a little bit by the team that he's on. He's got Victor Hedman, Brian McDonough, Eric Cernak, and years prior Mikhail Sergachev as well before he was traded. But having watched him play, like he makes enough plays where I'm like, this guy should be in the lineup or higher up in the lineup. And I get why they had him on the third pair. Like they had other players who could slot in with Hedman or with McDonough who kind of matched their play a little better. Whereas like Perbix was on the third pair with Emil Lilleberg for the most part because Lilleberg is a hard-hitting defenseman. He wasn't jumping up in the play very much. Perbix could do that when he needed to, but with Hedman and McDonough, they're more likely to jump up, and Perbix didn't want to have him be the last man back, which I think is fine. But I also think this guy has room to grow. Don't forget, he was on one of the Olympic teams for the United States when they didn't have NHL players when he was coming out of college. Like, he is definitely a good player. I just think that he got a bit sheltered in Tampa Bay. And I think if with a better opportunity in Detroit and with a new coaching staff and one that's had success with, the likes of Mikey Anderson and Jordan Spence and Sean Dursey and Sean Walker and those guys, grooming them out there in Los Angeles. Like, I think he could definitely be a solid shutdown guy to be paired with Edvinsson. Like, you have these two massive defensemen with long reach, not overly physical, but they are very, very well positioned, both in all three zones. So they're more of a suffocating pair than a physical shutdown pair. But that's the reason why I made him a priority for the Red Wings to slot in on the right side there. Do you love it now, or do you still just?
I do. I like it, and I was kind of wondering if that was your rationale, was kind of tapping into some untapped potential maybe, while also not blocking Axel Sandin Pellikka. I think as much as I'm banging the drum about getting Aaron Ekblad, I do recognize that that's probably like the best critique of that move. So going out and getting a Perbix instead, I think kind of solves that issue while solving the other issue of the defense has to get fixed.
If you had to choose only one of the three major defensemen that you guys projected or hoped would sign with the Red Wings, how would you rate those between Ekblad, Gavrikov, and K'Andre Miller?
Well, I would probably I think I'd go Gavrikov, Miller, Ekblad.
All right, I gotta stay true to what I said here. So I'm gonna say Ekblad number one, Gavrikov number two. I did say it feels like you got to get one or the other, and then I'll say K'Andre Miller third. K'Andre Miller is gonna go third here because they have to trade for him, whereas Gavrikov and Ekblad, you just gotta get them signed to a contract.
Well, I did like a lot of your signings or hypotheticals, but there's one name that you forgot in Tampa Bay, and that's Isaac Howard. And I'm still hoping that the Red Wings can swing a deal this summer for my Michigan State brethren, because he looks like he could be something good. And yeah, that's my 2 cents for it.
We did a fan vote for this on Twitter. Not surprisingly, Devin, his team is in the lead. Almost 2/3 of the vote, a little over 2/3 of the vote, compared to mine. I get it. I feel like bunting turned people off, and that's all they saw. So, Devin, I accept that people like yours better than mine, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but I mean, Marchman's already gone now, so it's all,
Yeah.
I think
By
Marchman
def by default, I think Tony's wins because already mine's proven to be nonsense. So
it literally happened as soon as we started the podcast. It's unbelievable. Great stuff, guys. Devin wins. Sorry, Tony. Shifting gears now, guys. We're going to go to this week's prospect profile, as I mentioned in the open. And this week, we're going to look at Brandon Wheat King's Roger McQueen, a 6'5", 198-pound forward. Missed some time this season with the back injury. He had a fractured vertebrae in his lower back. Competed, was a full participant at the NHL Combine and looked good there. I'm curious, Devin, what are your thoughts on this guy? Is he going to even be there at 13 for the Red Wings to pick? And some of the comparables I've seen most recently, Ryan Getzlaf, Tage Thompson, are those even realistic? Or who would you compare him to? Love to hear your thoughts, man.
well, I think Roger McQueen, first and foremost, is maybe one of the more polarizing prospects in this in the first round of this year's draft class, and it all kind of comes down to two main factors. How do you feel about very, very large forwards? And how do you feel about players that already kind of have a little bit of a reputation for maybe being prone? Um, let's kind of cut to the chase there. Roger McQueen this season only played 17 regular season games in the WHL, was able to get into 3 playoff games, but that's not a whole lot of hockey. You're very much basing your how you feel about this player kind of on a small period of time and then what he's done in the past, as well as just his physical toolkit. Now, to speak on the physical toolkit, players like this don't grow on trees, even though he is built like one. Like you said, Evan, 6'5", 192. He needs to gain some weight first and foremost. Very tall, very lanky. I think I'd like to see him gain 20 to 30 pounds when he's all said and done, and then he'll be an absolute beast. Um, the comparisons out there, Getzlaf, Thompson. Thompson's kind of who I've always thought of when I look at this player. I very much, if he hits, he's going to be a Tage Thompson, and I think that that's the people who like this prospect. I think that's what they see too. The other end of this, where there's maybe a little trepidation, obviously it comes from the injury, but I have maybe a little bit of PTSD from big skilled forwards that are projected to be top 10 picks and all this. I always think about Michael Rasmussen and how, people were super high on him and um, had a lot of reason to have faith in him when the Red Wings did pick him ninth overall. I even going back to when they picked him, it was seen as kind of a little bit of a reach. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to big forwards like this, it's kind of their results are kind of extremes. It's either they're Tage Thompson or they're this bully on the fourth line who is a pain in the ass to play against. But like you're not getting, high end production from that player. And if you're taking Roger McQueen in the first round, you better hope that he's going to be closer to Tage Thompson than Michael Rasmussen. Um, Now, having said that, like I said, I don't see Michael Rasmussen when I look at this player. I just kind of have that in the back of my mind of this player has a really high ceiling, but also kind of a really low floor. And this is one of the reasons why I gravitate to players like Ekblad, or not Ekblad, Eklund. Can you imagine how I got that mixed up? Um, how I kind of gravitate to players like Eklund because the range of possibilities isn't nearly as wide. I think Eklund will be a good player. It just depends on how good of one. I think there's a very high possibility that McQueen's just an okay player. And if he is a really, really good one, there's also a really good chance that he's a really, really often injured one too. So um, when he does play he knows how to use his size to his advantage. It's probably his best tool. Is that not only does he have this size, but he knows how to use it. There's plenty of players out there that are built like a tank, and they just, for whatever reason, they don't use it to their advantage. McQueen has long reach. He definitely uses that. He uses his size to create space for himself, and also um, it helps him keep the puck on his stick. And when the puck is on his stick, he's able to make plays and ultimately make his teammates better. Um, he's a centerman. I think that if he hits, like I said, Tage Thompson's the sky here, to be honest with you. I think that he could be a really high end goal scorer that also has the ability to create and set up and just be really hard to deal with because he's huge. The Red Wings very clearly like to add size to their pipeline, specifically on the blue line. They don't really have a player outside of Elmer Soderblom and Michael Rasmussen that is built like this guy. And maybe that's a reason why they are interested in him. They have scouted this player. There is some interest there. The biggest thing, as you alluded to, Evan, is whether or not this player will even be available at 13th overall. If he's there at 13th overall, you're gonna have to consider him. He's just a very unique player. Um, but if he's there at 13th overall, that means 12 other teams have their reservations about him for one reason or another, and you have to imagine that the Red Wings might have those reservations too. So if he's there at 13th overall, someone to consider. I know he's kind of in my list of players that would at least intrigue me if he was the pick. But I'm not moving off of Eklund as my preferred option here if my choice is McQueen or Eklund.
Shocker. Victor Eklund fan club president. Where do you think, if there weren't the injury concerns, where does he go in this draft, in your opinion?
If there weren't injury concerns, then we'd yeah, obviously we'd have like a full season to really look at here. And there's a really good decent chance that he's a top five guy, maybe even a top three. Um, it's NHL teams value size. I mean, there are some teams that value it a little too much, to be honest with you. But if a player is able to achieve that combination of um, just daunting size to go up against and high end skill, that's a player you jump at the opportunity to grab. So I do think the injuries are kind of a really big reason why there's even a possibility that he's going to fall into the Red Wings' laps. Um, and maybe that speaks to the skill level that this player has, to where if he was able to play a full season, we're definitely not even going to talk about him because he's going to go before 13th overall.
Why do you think it is that there's that injury stigma around Roger McQueen, but when you look at likely first overall pick Matthew Schaefer, who was limited to just 17 games this past season, that same concern isn't there? Now, I know, like, the back injury, shoulder injury, like, different things, but like they played in roughly the same amount of games this past season. But it definitely seems like this story is falling around McQueen a lot more than it is Schaefer.
I think that's a really good question, and I think it does speak to some of the maybe biases that are out there in the world of the NHL. I think that some of it has to do with how McQueen plays. When he does play, he's not afraid to use his size, like I said, and that when you are inducing contact with players, you're more likely to eventually incur an injury. Um, whereas that's not necessarily as big of a piece of Schaefer's profile there. And then also, for what it's worth too, this is one of the reasons why I said I really think McQueen needs to bulk up a bit in the next few years, because when you're that big, I mean, we see this with like basketball players too. The bigger you are, the more strain you put on your bones, and your body has to be able to support you even more. And when you don't have as much muscle on your frame, um, you're even more likely to incur injury if you're inducing contact. So I think uh, this is kind of a wishy-washy answer. I think there is some bias at play here, and maybe it is a little unfair to have this on McQueen but not this other player. But I also think that it's kind of, you have to take into account, because when McQueen does play, he plays a style that typically leads to an injury eventually.
I think the back injuries are a little more serious than the shoulder
For sure.
injuries as well. Those are big concerns. You cannot play hockey with a jacked up back. Guys, we're running out of time here, but I want to thank both of you for some great information today. We are going to be back next week, and we'll be back the day before the draft to do our very own mock draft. So please join us next week as we do that. Devin will hit one more prospect profile. I will be at the draft on Friday, and hopefully we'll be creating some content from there. Hopefully going to hear from one of the Red Wings draft picks out here in LA, and I'll try to get some sound if we can. So I'm very excited about that. Other than that, guys, great show. Have a good week. We'll talk soon. Thanks for watching the Flying Octopus Podcast, episode 40.
Thanks for listening to the Flying Octopus Podcast. Follow us on YouTube at the Flying Octopus channel and Twitter at Flying Octopod.